Good evening. Good evening. Thank you all. I'm Floyd Hall. I work as an artist, as a documentarian, as a curator. I currently serve as the director of Science Gallery Atlanta. And a lot of my work really is in service to this city and in service to the communities that help make me who I am. So I thank you all for being here today, this evening. And as far as intros, I would love for everyone to introduce themselves, but really what I would love to help, I think, add to that origin story is for the artists, I would love for you to say who you are, but also talk about the first piece of work you sold. If you can remember anything about that moment, the timeline, the piece, make it brief, but just talk about that first piece that you sold. For the collectors, talk about the first piece you bought. And what was it about that piece that spoke to you? And for our gallery representative here, same thing. You know, what was the first piece that you sold, and what was it about that meant something to you? So I would love for everyone to sort of add that to, you know, name who you are, but really help us understand your origin story.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is RENALDO NEHEMIAH. I'm more of a collector and I guess an influencer to getting black people to collect art. I would say my first piece of art that I ever brought was an original Purvis Young, and then actually sold a piece of a couple of Gordon Parks and some Jim Alexanders. It's one of my first things.
Hi, everybody. My name is KARO, DURO. I'm an artist and consultant. I'm in the fusion between technology and creativity, so I do a lot of consulting work for companies in the metaverse, NFTs, a lot of corporate firms that are really looking to branch themselves in there, but I am an artist first, and so for me, the first piece I sold, man, this is a throwback because you're making me really, have to think. I'm in the digital space, right? So it's interesting because while I am a digital artist, I print a lot of my work. The first piece I sold was maybe back in 2018. It was I'm thinking about the very first print back in my origin days, and for me what that meant was that, wow, like there was an audience for my work, and there was people just looking toward this vision I had. I create very strange work, so I can't tell you guys the name because it was literally years ago, like 5-6 years ago, but as a digital artist, I was able to sell my work, and to authenticate it, I sign it and things like that. So guess does that answer the question for you? Yeah, that's the first piece.
Hello, everyone. My name is ONAJE Henderson. I'm an owner of Zuccotti Gallery here in Atlanta, Georgia. So the first piece I sold, I would say the first memorable piece, I was working in corporate still, and we were selling work. We would rent out gallery spaces and do shows and things like that. And I was working at Accenture at the time.
Oh, I worked at Accenture.
Oh, really?
I left, but...
Trauma.
Yeah, we're trauma bonding right now.
But so at Accenture, I wanted to meet black partners, so I set up a meeting, and he said, "What do you want to talk about?" And I was like, "I just want to meet a black partner." I hadn't met a black partner yet, and all the partners were white, so I was like, "Well, let me meet one." So we sat in there, he got a laugh, he said, "What do you do?" And I told him about the art side of things, and he said, "Okay." So 2 weeks later, he's at my parents' house, looking at my father's work, and he bought a few paintings from us, and when he was writing the check out, he looked at me and said, "Why do you work for us?" And I said, "Because I'm not making enough money over here yet to do that." And I remember him encouraging me, even after that, even in my career as well, just because he said, "You have something there." And he just continued to encourage me, so I remember that piece.
Hello, everyone. I'm Petey Parker. I am the general manager of Peter Street Station. I'm also an artist, too. My first piece I sold during COVID, I believe. I had it listed for $500 initially, and then when my first collector called me, when I found out who he was, I bumped it up a lot. And I actually hand-delivered that piece because of COVID, all the delivery methods were messed up. So I drove it from Atlanta to LA and hand-delivered it within a week, and that piece was actually sold to Francis Lawrence, who's the director of Hunger Games. And during COVID, during all the protests, and that was my first painting ever, so I think I found my purpose, you know, within that drive at least.
So I think it was important for everyone to like talk about that, because I think that sort of grounds us in some of what our perspectives are on this stage when it comes to how we collect, why we collect, and then as we think about these different spaces. So one of the things that has to happen when we're collecting or when we're selling something is we have to acknowledge that it has value. And I think one of the largest, I think, sort of like discussion points around, you know, URL versus IRL is like, how do we assess like the value of what's happening in the digital space? So I'm gonna go to ONAJE because you actually are in the physical gallery space. And as you think about the URL sort of like developing art space, how do you think about value and what you're selling relative to the physical space versus these digital marketplaces?
I actually think it's all of it is great. I think that the idea of when you look at gallery models and how old the gallery model is, at some point things are going to change, right? And if I look at my nieces, for example, they have virtual worlds, they got virtual apartments, they got work on the walls, but it's becoming, they're growing up with this stuff as well. Now that's not to say that, in regards to my personal opinions about, in regards to value, understanding it all. I think what's happening though is that in technology, it's hard to even assess value now. Everything's moving so fast and it's so fluid that it really becomes really about the people again, right? So that's the beauty of it. I think that when it comes down to, for example, we released a few NFTs a little earlier on, and it was more saying like, look, we need to be in this space as well because we can't ignore what's happening, right? And we can grow and learn and understand as it goes as well, but that virtual space is real. And so I think in regards to assessing value from it, some of that's still to come, right? So like, just like in the I would say, I don't want to say real world, but you know, what I don't know, what are we in? What is this?
Physical world.
Yeah, all right.
It's a physical world.
So in the physical world, you know, a lot of value is driven by collectors and demand and all that good stuff as well, just like any other thing. So when you buy, whether it be purses, shoes, whatever else, it's demand. And so I think understanding how it's going to work in the virtual world is going to be pretty interesting, but I think they're still getting a hold of that right now. So you see, like, for example, it's about who buys in the virtual space. So that's why the Ape series can go for all those hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, if you look at work and you say, look, well, this work looks like it should go for the same amount, but it's no way of telling yet. And I mean, and it kind of happens in the real world that way as well, but I think that there's going to be some type of balance that's going to be found at some point.
Ronaldo, I would love you to answer that also. Thinking about your POV as a collector, and you mentioned some of your earliest works that you collected, but thinking about the digital space or the virtual space, when you think about value and what you're willing to invest in that space, what are the first things that come to mind?
I'm a realist, so I don't see no value in it because me personally, I physically want to see it. I physically want to live with it every moment I walk into my house. And that's just how I am. I'm like an empath. I have to absorb things. And, you know, I respect that world, but like, you know, I collect old school cars. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, it's something about that machine that you could go out there and you could mess with the engine and you could do this and it could tell you something. In the virtual world, I still like, you know, one day it might crash. Then this investment that you just put this money into just disappeared into thin air and you can't go grab it, you can't do nothing to it. And then my thing is too is like, what happens if I collect art based off of for my daughters to pass down, so then in my will and my trust that they could physically say that this is my father's piece. Now say what happens if technology changed by the time my daughter is 25 years old and that platform doesn't exist no more. Now that art that I brought for her, whatever invested is gone. So it's just me personally that I'm, you know, it's, I guess if you like Kool-Aid or you like sweet tea, it's like, yeah.
I want to stay right there because you talked a lot about being able to pass it on or like ownership, right? And like what does ownership look like in the real world versus the virtual world, but also thinking about, so let's even like back up. Like when we talk about NFTs and the crypto spaces, we're really talking about blockchain technology and non-fungible tokens and the way in which these ecosystems are developing in ways that are really trying to reinforce how we own things in virtual spaces. So if we think about copying and pasting a photo, or passing or taking a screenshot of something, to our naked eye, we may not be able to determine the differences between one or 5 different versions of that, but in these virtual spaces, we're trying to establish what does ownership look like. And so how does that then get transferred, to your point, about how do we pass that down? How do we transfer that? So I think there's both some of these spaces that we hear about, or some of the coins, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Ethereum, and how do we actually manipulate that amongst each other across space and time. But with that as context, though, when you talk about the value of something crashing, I mean, I don't think that's that any different than a physical piece. Like at some point, someone has to want to buy it. And so if there's no one to buy it, then there's no market for it.
Yeah, now in my life, I buy art to keep it forever.
Okay.
I'm not buying anything to sell it. I'm buying it to keep it in my family, to the point of me as a young man. I could just speak this and I could just say it like this. Me as a young man under 40 years old, I don't know any young man that has the extensive art collection that I do. And my bigger vision is to my art collection to be put into museums for my daughters to walk into my wing of a museum and say, this is what my father has collected for me and for our family, and grab the value in that, to the point that then museums are renting my art from my family to show it around the world. That's my method to it, because I don't see no other young black man saying that he has immersed all of this amazing art from these artists to be shown around the world, to go for generation to generation and have it in his trust, and then have it in his dynasty trust, that my great-grandkids or my grandkids that I don't even know exist yet could keep that going. So I do it as more of a generational manipulation to wealth, to, stunt on the other ones.
I mean, who doesn't love to stunt, right? So we're going to come back to that. Not the stunning part. We might,
Right.
but more so the ownership part. KARO, I want you to chime in here, because I think when we're hearing Ronaldo talk about this digital space and the value or lack thereof, or a different approach to how that's valued, I know you as an artist are using the computer and these virtual spaces as your world, right? So when you think about the value that you're creating and how that has to either live on or increase, or just thinking about how you develop your career, when you see a space or the spaces like the metaverse or Ethereum or OpenSea or all these other platforms evolve for someone like you, how do you think about the value that you want to create for your work so that it may even be collected and passed down or passed around?
Yeah, you said a lot that I was reflecting on, and I want to kind of just touch base on that. When it comes to the value of an NFT, I think that the mainstream has kind of pushed our minds into thinking this is a get-rich-quick scheme and you're just buying the artwork, this JPEG. I'm very much so in the intersection. Like, I have physical art shows, really more than I have digital. And I'm in that intersection because I do believe that artists need to understand what an NFT really is, and really what you're saying when you have an NFT of something is really that you are authenticating its value. So as an art collector, for you, Ronaldo, a physical art collector, to pass, let's say you bought a piece from George, right? And I'm just gonna use you. You buy a piece from George, but let's say that there are a lot of fraudulent pieces of George's in the market. What George needs to do is have an NFT attached to his physical piece, because that means that whenever that piece is sold, that NFT, you can also transfer the ledger, you write in the ledger. That's what the blockchain is a bunch of ledgers. But you essentially are saying that whenever this piece is sold, this blockchain that can never be hacked. You really can't hack it. That's why it's so energy intensive. You cannot hack the blockchain. Now, you can steal Bitcoin, have other people's address. You can hack people's accounts on a web platform. The blockchain itself is the underneath layer that runs this NFT, X, Y, and Z, etc. So when it comes to like, okay, I want to transfer the NFT to my, or these NFTs to my grandchildren, etc., like, it actually is very important as an art collector to implement that type of scheme, because a physical ledger of the artwork can be burned, right? Like, you could pretend and write things and overwrite things, etc. So I just wanted to touch base on that for you to think about it a different way in that sense of like the physical artwork being attached to a non-fungible token. Because I think right now what we're seeing is just, celebrities and scammers and all this stuff, and it's making the public not realize the true value of what this technology is. So to answer your question, for me as an artist, where I see the value for my work is really, one, the ability to be able to authenticate this endorsement. So when, let's say, I personally sell my pieces physically, but I sign them. I have them very high printed, large prints of my work, but I also sell the NFT of it too, right? So you endorsed me, right? It's the same thing as getting an autograph from a celebrity. Why does it matter if not you giving it the inherent value, right? So for me, I use it that's how I see the value, but also these things are more so keys, right? Keys into my world, this world I'm building, so that 40 years down the line, when I'm dead, the digital world and what it will really be in the future will really unlock a gate for my grandchildren to be like, hey, I have this OG piece from my grandma, and it means something to these digital collectors. Right now, we are in the very early stages. This is the beginning of history again. So to kind of, I say that to say, yes, there's a lot of value in that aspect, using it as keys into this artist's world. Yeah.
So what I think we're getting to in this conversation thus far, and we have a couple other, I think, important places to go, is that it doesn't have to be either or. I think we can have both and when it comes to how your work gets authenticated and passed down. And I think ONAJE as someone who runs, is it the oldest Black gallery in the city right now, or longest open Black gallery? What was it? Yeah, that part, yeah. Okay, say it clear for us.
I've never even thought about it like that, but I think we are, as far as in existence, consecutive for about 15 years now we've been.
Okay. I just want to shout you out real quick.
I'll use that going forward now. Thank you.
Okay. But I say that to say you're in the position of artists both coming to you and you reaching out to them to think about how you can sell their work, right? Art is bought, but art is also sold, and you're in the business of selling work. Mm-hmm. So as you're educating the artists that you work with, what are you reading, learning, trying to pass on to those artists when it comes to how they can present their work, both in the physical space and in this NFT space?
I think right now, we still concentrate primarily on the physical space, of course, right? Like, that's, to me, I guess that piece is so important in regards to some of the things that Renaldo said in regards to being able to touch value, and that structure, that investment structure is hundreds of years old at this point. So even from a validation standpoint, we know that system of currency exists, right? But I think it's also important then for us to begin to look at technology differently, because the world is changing, and also as African Americans, a lot of times we're unfortunately a lot of the last to adopt when it comes to the technical space. And so it's important that this is like, so when the entry point is low, this is the time to get in, right? So if you think about people buying Bitcoin 20 years ago for $100 and what it's worth now, for example. And I think by nature we are safe. I mean, and rightfully so for even the history here in the United States, right? But the idea though, in something like this, if there's a low overhead, it's worth just trying. And that's just my opinion in regards to the technology piece of it. I think that for a lot of artists, I don't know. I kind of look at it like, and when you don't know what it's like I said, we introduced a couple of pieces just to see, just to be out there so we already understand it, so it already makes sense. You know, so when this platform really does hit, we'll be ready for it. And so I think that a lot of times it's the taking both in at the same time. And so like I can still continue to focus most of my energy on that physical space, and then saying, okay, I understand that everything is moved this way. So we're trying to have virtual art shows, and we're doing all these other things right now. So something's moving, and we need to pay attention to that as well. And at some point, kind of lead that as opposed to trying to play catch up with Silicon Valley and everything else that happens typically for us. So we need to be part of that new wave. And I have no problem just, you know, like I said, from an investment standpoint, currently it's low to get into, and we can figure it out as we go. And we're already positioned in and ready.
Petey, same question for you in terms of you being an artist that I know has had, you know, a lot of experience creating digital/virtual extensions of your work. As you see this landscape expanding, I won't say shifting, just expanding, you know, how are you informing yourself as you think about going forward?
Man, I think the goal, if you're able to, is to kind of merge the two, for sure. I think I got in the game as an artist initially doing augmented reality stuff. I couldn't paint. I was doing digital things, so I would take my friends' work and break them down and animate them. And then through that, I was introduced to augmented reality, so you can look through a phone, and then that piece will move. And then when I started painting, I actually stepped away from AR and said, you know what, I want to show that I'm very good at painting. I can use my hands and create stuff. So now with NFTs coming into play, I think it's a good opportunity to kind of merge both. So Ronaldo could buy my physical piece and really feel like it's something fire enough to buy. But if he wants to, he could put his phone up and say, watch it move. It's a character piece. Or let me call him and ask him to update this, you know what I'm saying? And to impress somebody. So that's where I am. I'm trying to figure out how to take this AR element and make it an NFT and put it on the platform to where your NFTs don't just have to be on the screen, or you can just walk up to it and it moves in front of your face. So that's where I am right now. I'm trying to merge the two. I think it's important to like not leave where we started behind, but to bring it along with you, you know what I'm saying? But not also, you can't be naive and think that the world is just gonna not, it's obvious it's going towards this, but I just like the physical stuff too, so why not just merge them, you know? So.
I think one of the things that KARO mentioned was really the underlying technology behind these spaces that I think has the largest potential to really shift how we interact with both physical and digital art worlds. One thing that you kind of touched on was the blockchain technology, but I think beyond that is thinking about how that looks when it comes to smart contracts. And, you know, for both artists who make work in the real world and well, it's all real depending on what you think, but artists who make work. But thinking about smart contracts being a way to, you know, reward artists or compensate artists or retain some ownership of that work as it passes through hands. So Ronaldo or ONAJE, you know, when you're either buying work or selling work, the artist gets compensated usually the first time. With smart contracts, there's the capacity for artists to get compensated every time that work gets sold. And we talk about agency, right? You know, you may have an artist at the early part of their career sell a painting for $10,000 and then they blow up 30 years later and it's, you know, 30 million and they don't see that. So I think, you know, the larger, I think, impact of what this might be comes from the technology side of that. So KARO, could you maybe say more about any of that you're thinking about when it comes to the technology and how things like smart contracts, I think, help us play in that space of these physical paintings, but also the ledger of how artists can continue to reap the benefits of their work as their prominence grows?
Yeah, you know, when it comes to the world of smart contracts, right, it isn't just reserved for digital artists or artists in the digital space. It's really something, like I said, you can use to attach to your physical work to ensure that you do get those residuals, you do get paid, because the thing about how smart contracts work is that they are, a program, they're a code, right? You cannot overwrite the smart contract. You can, someone who's skilled can read your smart contract and understand that, like he said, each time this painting gets sold, i.e., for example, if you attach an NFT to the painting, and I can speak more about that later, but if you were to align an NFT to your painting, in order for someone to buy that painting, they have to get the NFT transferred to them, and so on and so forth. Your transaction can take place through certain websites that, like OpenSea, I wouldn't really recommend them right now, but just because of everything that's going on. But I'm using that because that's the most mainstream. There's so many other like sustainable companies that are working towards like that whole transaction, but I'm using them as the most mainstream example. But yeah, so when your piece gets sold, you get that residual each time. So you don't, like I said, it's not reserved for just a digital artist in the space. And the thing about smart contracts is that you, yes, can have your physical contract, which is, you go to a lawyer, you go to then the notary to notarize it, etc. The thing about smart contracts is it never fails. Nobody can cheat you out of your money. If you're selling that piece, if other people sell that piece for $5 million, you sold it for 500, you will always get that percentage that's listed in that smart contract, whether you're a physical artist or a musician, etc. So that's kind of like my reasoning, for being in that world.
I got a quick question. Who validates, like how, I'm with you, but I'm curious, who validates that? Like, who makes the blockchain like the blockchain,
The blockchain, oh my God, okay. Where do we go? This is a deep question, right? The reason why the blockchain it cannot be, okay, where do I start? The reason why the blockchain can't necessarily be altered is because the system is run by a bunch of decentralized computers, right? So the banking system is centralized. The bank authenticates everything. Essentially, whenever somebody is trying to, when people say they're minting Bitcoin, what they're doing is they're solving really complex equations and et cetera, right? That the reason why they have those complex equations is so that people cannot hack. It's very hard to hack to say you have more Bitcoin than you do because there's this ledger that everybody has access to. So if you pretended that you have 50 Bitcoin or you changed the HTML on your web page to say it has 50 Bitcoin, well, he has access to ledger and he can see that you don't. So it's millions of very intellectual people. Of course, it's not like these, it's millions of people that are part of this chain of network, and we are all a part of it. Anytime you enter this space, anytime you buy a Bitcoin, you mint an NFT. I could ramble on about it. You see, I'm like, where do we start with this? So it is authenticated almost like this, this thing where everybody's watching. You can always see every time a new entry enters the ledger. There's actually a way to physically see that. This is not a hidden thing like the banking system, etc. So it's authenticated. It's almost self-authenticating by every individual that participates in it. Does that kind of, yeah.
It's scary, but
Yeah, it is an interesting place. It is an interesting place. But the reason why I said you can't hack it is because of this intensive, like, boundary between minting a Bitcoin and actually like owning a Bitcoin, etc. Like it is not the difference between OpenSea is an interface that you use to interact with the blockchain. It is not the blockchain itself. OpenSea can be hacked. I can't hack your account, but I'm saying I can get your password and look at your private key and steal your Bitcoin. You cannot hack the blockchain. Now, the people behind the scenes, it's kind of a secret who really created it. I can't sit here and say it's foolproof. Nothing is really foolproof, but you get my drift, right?
Ronaldo.
And this is why, the understanding why I don't like it, and this is what I'm about to say. Why society can't show the love and respect to artists and treat it just like the music industry, right?
Nice.
If I'm an artist and I'm a producer, if I make the song, I give you the points, or I have a split sheet, right? They put this in the system, so now every time this song is streamed, this is the same thing as your work is being sold, you get paid in a check or a deposit, right? So why is it not as easy as that? If I sold your art, if I'm an artist, if PD sold his art to me, we signed this agreement, send it to a file or something that is uploaded how they do the music industry, and if I sell it again, he still gets his royalties. Why is it so complex?
I think it's
And that's what I'm saying.
I think that what we're talking about with music, when we talk about, ASCAP or BMI,
Right, there should be,
collecting,
I think
right.
there should be something that is a committee of black executives to protect artists, make a same thing as ASCAP version of art for artists, and just pay them off their royalties and then protect it like that. Yeah. And then it'd be done, because now, guess what happens? If something happened, there's a committee, there's an office that we could go to and go do the research or pull up the files, who sold it on a ledger and everything, instead of, like PG said, who owns the blockchain? So something go crazy, who you gonna run to?
Well, yeah,
I think that we're in the early stages of that, though. I mean, it's one of those things where what you're describing, I think, is kind of what we're talking about, but we're just at the very beginning of it, so it looks a tad bit messy. And so, well, think about music, right? At some point, everyone agreed upon what the standards were, what the organizations were that would collect that. I think now we're determining, will it be OpenSea 5 years from now? Maybe not. Will it be Ethereum as the go-to coin? Maybe, maybe not. Bitcoin? Maybe not. But I think we're in this early stage of getting to that. I think it just looks a little bit messy as we formulate what the standards actually are. But I think what you mentioned in terms of who is involved in determining that is also very important, because you mentioned we don't know who really owns or runs or has set up the blockchain, right? I think this highlights the fact that a lot of times black artists are the end users of the product and not the architects of the ecosystem. And so we're not in those spaces of like designing these worlds to make sure that we don't mimic the same flaws that we have in this world. So ONAJE, as a curator, when someone says, hey, I want you to sell my piece, but how do we authenticate that I get paid every time after it gets sold? What do you tell them? Now, what do you like if someone says, yeah, I want this to go through Zucot, but you know what? If I get big and someone has this in their home and they sell it, I want a piece of that.
So, first of all, I think that artists should continue to make money off their work as it continues to go down the line. I think right now, if you look at the history of how art collecting began, like from the very, very beginning, it was never designed that way. It was designed to create wealth for a certain group of people, and then it's based off of them. So the power is in the collector. So for example, if we got a group of our friends together and we start buying work, and we can sell that work for tons of money because we can drive it up through this space. So like you're saying, no one knows who these people are. In the art world, it's the same way though. So there aren't any black-owned auction houses, so how does our work get evaluated, right? So there is always this, who is this person, that's behind the scenes that's kind of doing all these things. And we have names that we can throw out, but then there's institutions that we can throw out and all this other type of stuff, but who's actually doing this, right? So it exists on both sides. So that the ambiguity is there on either side, no matter what. So whether or not, and I think that's the scary part of it. I think that what happens though is that we have to be on both the physical side and the virtual side. We have to participate more so we do even have a voice in general. So that's what I'm saying in regards to being early adopters on this virtual reality side, we have a better chance of even having those type of conversations. The other one, when you look at the basis for what's happening now, African American art, we're being told what to collect by people who are not even in our community now. And so we don't own that piece of it from evaluation. Now we can tell you what's beautiful and what's wonderful in our community, but in regards to what's actually worth money, we don't determine that now. And so that's where the beauty kind of comes in having some type of voice. Now you can't create these ideas where the issue is the system is set up in the real world right now where the collector has all the power. So if the collector buys the piece and they say, okay, well, it's my piece now. I own this piece. I can do whatever I want with it other than making prints because you may own the copyright for your rest, but I can resell this piece over and over and over again. There's no system in place. And so that's where that kind of merge of what, honestly, if you all, both of your points kind of can work together to create that system you're talking about and use the technology of that system behind, the banking behind it could be her system. So it's all coming though. It's kind of like, one thing I want to say is that it's kind of like this. I know I'm old enough to remember when email first came out. I remember people saying, so you mean to tell my mail gonna come in the computer? Like, you know, like idea of, and we didn't understand it. And now people don't really even check their mail anymore. But just to show you how in such a short amount of time, things can change. And so the conversation is great because we have to be part of all of the dialogue if we want to have a voice in any of it.
So I think we're about to get close to some Q&A, right? Okay. But I think I wanted everyone to kind of give some final thoughts. But I think, Onaje, your point is one of the ones I wanted to touch on is every time there's new technology, we adapt. You know, whether it was the internet to begin with, oh, you're gonna sell work over the website? You know, you're gonna sell work on Instagram? Like all those things that, you know, have now happened that now become regular, where at one point seen as disruptors, and now we've integrated into how we actually do business. And I think we talk about the art of collecting, really it's the art of commerce. And I think we just really keep evolving that. And so we like to think of things as like disruptions, but at some point we're gonna integrate it into what we do and it'll feel pretty normal. So I would love, starting from the far end to this end, any final thoughts or just kind of, you know, what you're mulling over at this point, PD?
Man, I do think I'm gonna take a stab again at NFTs. I think my whole approach to everything really is just to show that somebody with my skin color could do certain things, and I kind of wait to see how I could be the most impressive at it. There was a point to where I would say about 3 months ago I was gonna release, I found out that I can code a method to release 10,000 NFTs at one time, and I thought for myself to do that, that would be impressive enough to me to do an NFT. And then I got the opportunity to do my own solo physical show, and they got canceled out. So I think I'm gonna go back to that, but I do like what RENALDO said. I think this NFT conversation has actually sparked in me the idea to actually start our own ASCAP when it comes to art. Why not, you know? We're here in Atlanta. This room alone has the power to just spark something. So why not sit down and really create a committee that has everybody's back, you know, as far as, you know, not just, I don't want to just say our skin color, but we have the power to do that. So why not start something to get that going to where we can, you know, checks and balances and stuff like that. So I do like NFTs for a number of reasons, but primarily now because it's starting a conversation about what we can do with physical stuff and how it relates to the music industry. So I'm excited about it.
So my business partners we're all engineers. And so when you mentioned disruption, right? So the idea of, we literally ask the question all the time, so why do we do things this way? So like galleries are based off system, but they didn't even have us in mind. So like the idea of disrupting any of this stuff is great, right? But continuing to try to push this thing forward. So we just became technology partners with Microsoft. And in that, we're now trying to push in a completely different direction in regards to not even from the NFT space, but just connectivity in general, right? So there's so many things and so many opportunities out there to continue to ask these questions. And I'm saying that we can continue to do the one thing that we are doing right now and now adopt and get ourselves ready for these things that are coming. If you want to know where technology is going, you just look at a 15-year-old and at the ease at which they use technology and how real it is to them. We got to start paying attention to it now if we even want to exist. I mean, you think about it. It's millionaires right now who are 15 who literally are showing themselves eat food on the internet. And you think, if I told you this 15 years ago, people will watch you eat food and have the speakers up loud so they can hear you smack, and they'll make money off of that. It sounds crazy, but people are making tons of money doing that right now. So we got to respect the fact that things are changing, culture's changing, people are changing. And so with that, then we have to be disruptive enough to look at our own current system and say, if this does take place, we're agile enough to say, okay, we can adapt to this, but we also keep our systems in place as well. So I think it's important to consider both.
And kind of to combine what RENALDO said and what you said, Onaje, like I feel like it doesn't have to be an either or. And what you specifically said about these groups, like, you know, us actually forming trust with each other, it's not whether you go digital or you go physical, it's what understanding that technology is, what it means for us, and what we can do with it, you know, because when it comes to things like smart contract, it's not, like I said, just reserved for digital artists. If we want to create an organization that's making sure artists, musicians specifically, because that's a huge issue, these 360 deals, you know, like musicians are getting paid what they're owed, et cetera, we can actually implement that technology in that world. Separate the technology from the mainstream and how it's being used right now in this early stage of, like, you know, this freaking rat race, Meta, and all these people are emphasizing, I think, the wrong aspects of the technology. And of course, like, as an artist in the space, I appreciate what it's for because it has enhanced opportunities for me, but I'm also aware of, like, what it really means for our community specifically. And so I think, you know, just the last note that I would just touch on is, like, yeah, separate the technology from, you know, the noise and understand what that is and how we can use it. And not, instead of, like, you know, it is overwhelming to think that in the next few years, the things that we may be, you know, in touch with may be rendered obsolete, the internet as we know it, you know, and it is an overwhelming thought, but it's okay because we're talking about it now. And the fact that we're talking about it now means that in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, when our children are entering these spaces and they're 5 years old, or God forbid, 5 years old on the internet, but, like, you know, like, they're like 15 years old in the metaverse, we know what they're engaging with, we know what they're interacting with, you know, so that's what my perspective on it is.
I love everything. I love all progression and change. My biggest thing I want to leave with people is, like, I'm just very pro-black, and all I'm gonna say is I'm just tired of these other people validating our black artists and making money off of them, and we need to change that, like, now. And I had to say this in front of, I called them other person. I had told them, I said, yo, listen, I am a realist. I'm very aggressive, and I don't like that you still use your gallery to validate black artists, but you're stealing from them. So what I'm saying is, if we can, stop giving our art and our validation of the gift of artists to the other people to make them money because they really don't care. And that's a sign of slavery. We have black curators in here, we got black art advisors in here. Why we just move everything to us and just make our own validation and our people get their money. And that's it, because I feel like the others don't validate nothing but us. They can't play sports like us. They can't do nothing that we do. So I told him, yo, listen, you think you dead? How about me and you get in this race and we're gonna see who win? And then whatever you got, I take it, which 90% I'm gonna take it anyway because I'm more powerful than you based off my intellect, and that's just with black artists. I don't see no white artists that we wanna put on our walls, but everywhere you go in these white galleries, they pushing more black art. But they putting the value of it that's taken out of reach for our black people to buy it. So I'd rather give my money to Zucard than going to another gallery and he validating that, but I could just validate it through my brother right here. And then see the black artists that I know, Artemis Jenkins, and say, bro, I'm gonna buy your art, but I'm gonna give you the money too. At least it's validated through us and not through them. Christie's, the white folk don't care, and I go on record to tell them, stop selling our black art. Y'all stealing, because I don't wanna buy none of y'all white artists anyway. It doesn't have no soul to it. And just to say the end of that, I'm a purist, so it's like I told Kevin Williams, I got one of his pieces tatted on my whole thigh. To show every time somebody see me, they see that no justice, no peace with this young black woman on my leg. I'm not tatting no other color, race of art on my body because it doesn't mean nothing. And I told him, because Kevin Williams, I invest in you that much, I put it on my body till the day I die.
Questions?